Remember the days when Republicans cared about free speech? Remember the days when Republicans cared about cost? Remember the days when Republicans cared about the weaponization of government? Well, that's all gone out the window pretty quickly now that Donald Trump and Elon Musk, of course, are in the Oval Office. Part of being a Republican is being a hypocrite, being as shameless as possible, and so they have turned their backs, the GOP, of course, on any values they may have claimed to have. But Democrats aren't letting them do so easily. And today, in a House hearing on just this issue, government censorship being pushed by Donald Trump, Eric Swalwell made sure that a MAGA reporter, Matt Taibbi, who spoke so often and so much about how the Biden administration was censoring such important information falsely, he reminded him of what's going on right now. And we are going to get into all of that. But before we do, if I could quickly ask you to leave a like on this video. And if you haven't already and you enjoy our channel, to hit that subscribe button. It goes a long way, and it really does mean a lot to me. Now let's get in to Eric Swalwell.
Someone from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
For the last 3 years, Donald Trump campaigned on lowering your costs. Do they feel lower? Does anything about this hearing get us to lower costs? You were promised cheap eggs, and today you're getting cheap shots. And there's probably no better natural remedy for insomnia than a congressional hearing on anti-censorship. But, Mr. Taibbi, you're here, and would you agree that censorship is the suppression of ideas, words, images, and something that can be conducted by the government?
Yeah, it can also not be by the government, but yes.
And you would then agree that it's censorship for any government, democratic or authoritarian, run by a Democrat or a Republican, to bar the press from covering the government when the press reports something the government doesn't like?
Bar in what way?
Take away their credentials? Take away their access?
So, as a long time, I started my career as an independent journalist. Journalists who whine about not being credentialed should recognize that being on the outside is part of what being in the press is. I'm not terribly sympathetic to people who complain about that issue.
So if you report something that a government doesn't like and they take away access that others have, that's not censorship?
You can still cover it. That's not censorship.
Okay. And banning books, is that censorship?
Banning books is censorship. Yep.
So this topic is more complicated than the hearing title would suggest. And I would argue the difference between a Democratic approach and Democratic activists on this issue and Republicans is that as Democrats seek to attack mis- and disinformation, it's because their perception of information is that it is a means to the truth. And for many Republicans, they believe that information is a means to power. And so they are primarily concerned with using information, whether it's disinformation or misinformation, as long as it gets them to power, they're okay with it. And it's difficult to try and litigate what do you do with mis- and disinformation. And I will be honest with you. Sometimes Democratic voices object too much to mis- and disinformation. A lawyer once told me when I was a young prosecutor that I was jumping out of my seat too much, objecting to conduct by the defense attorney, and while I was probably legally right, it was just annoying the jury, and that I should pick my battles. So I get frustrated too sometimes when it feels like the penalty flag is being thrown too often. However, there is a difference, though, between censoring somebody because you disagree with them. I'll credit Chairman Jordan. He and I have had some spirited debates in this hearing room. Sometimes they've gotten quite personal by both of us. And sometimes when I land a point, he gets upset. His staff gets upset, but he takes it like a man. And he'll make his point right back at me, and I take it like a man. You know who doesn't take it like a man? Donald Trump, because he's not a man. He's a child. He's a small child. And he views censorship as a means to get rid of people who disagree with him. He wants to get rid of judges who disagree with him. He said that as recently as yesterday, Speaker Johnson is backing him up by suggesting that judges should just pause in interpreting his violations of the Constitution. Trump goes after his perceived political opponents. I know. When I was a part of the Russia investigation, his DOJ subpoenaed my emails and my cell phone records. He's a petty, punitive child. And I can recognize a toddler because I'm a parent of 3 of them. And I recognize the same behavior. And yes, censorship is occurring, but it's self-censorship. And it's by you all. Because I hear you in our private conversations when you agree that Trump is a child. I hear the people you tell that Trump is a child, whether it's lobbyists or reporters. But you shrink in this room and you shrink in the chamber and you self-censor yourselves from speaking out because you're afraid. And he's laughing at you that you take him so seriously because he's unserious. He's laughing that you think he is so powerful because he's weak. He's laughing that you think he is so big because he's quite small. So we need you. We need your voices right now. It can't just be this side. We're all in to speak up, and we need you to speak up too. Otherwise, we are all out of freedom. And I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentlemen.
It is no surprise to see people on the right abandon any care or any free speech values that they may have had when it's outlets that they don't like dealing with the consequences of reporting the truth or refusing to refer to the Gulf of Mexico or the Gulf of America by its preferred pronouns, as Tim Miller said on Twitter. These are people who say that Democrats are obsessed with aesthetics and labels, but they are demanding that we call a body of water its new fake name or else we suffer the consequences. It's ridiculous. And again, it goes to show that they don't actually care about any of these values that they espouse. Chief among them, the weaponization of government they claimed that happened under President Biden. But it didn't. Donald Trump was convicted of crimes because he committed them, and he should have been convicted of more. He should have been held accountable for more. That, unfortunately, is not happening today. We can hope maybe one day. But what is happening is actual weaponization of government, which was reported on by our friends at MSNBC in some really important work. This clip right here.
We are tracking the DOJ upheaval. A slew of prosecutors resigning. One federal prosecutor has also signed now a motion to go ahead and request the dismissal of those corruption charges against the New York mayor. That has been the focal point of this. It took longer because of the Trump DOJ's inability to get things done. In this case, things that their own recently departed aides say are wrong, improper, potentially even unconstitutional. Ed Sullivan is the trial lawyer with the DOJ Public Integrity Unit, who is close to retirement and helped this go forward under serious pressure from Trump officials. And so this is a story that matters. As I've said this week, it's one of the stories that the Trump White House is not promoting. And it's gotten far more difficult, messier, took a much longer time, as I mentioned, than they intended. Now, the Trump DOJ official here, Emile Bouvet, reportedly gathered the lawyers in an unusual morning meeting with a lot of pressure. Now, again, remember, this is not how the DOJ normally works. It's not even how most of the federal government works, although surely sometimes there are big, tough conversations. But we're talking about something far more unusual with regard to carrot and stick pressure, according to this reporting, which also matches the very whistleblowing we got from these recently departed officials, including the promise of some sort of reward for those who would sign and file this controversial motion.
He gave them an hour deadline to decide who was going to be the person to put themselves on the chopping block.
We'll all get fired, but who's going to replace us? They're going to hire us with loyalists to make sure this never happens again.
The judge, though, has to agree to drop this case officially.
It's very inappropriate for the department to engage in that kind of overt political bargaining.
Danielle Sassone, she's a profile in courage.
Rather than having a public integrity section with 22 lawyers, we will now have a public lack of integrity section.
That is just some of the concern and the reaction we've seen. You can see the story is a big one across all media. It's not like even Fox News, which has been more friendly to the administration, is ignoring it. You can't ignore this many resignations. What one former SDNY chief said on this program this week looked like almost a Nixonian Saturday Night Massacre. Now, the lead prosecutor on the Adams case resigned in protest, stating, if no one will tell the president that what they were trying to do is basically wrong, then, quote, you'll eventually find someone who is enough of a fool or enough of a coward to file your motion. No system of ordered liberty can allow the government to use the carrot of dismissing charges or the stick for a separate political agenda, the letter states. And he goes on to invoke what could be Donald Trump's point of view, call this a sort of more ignorant or benign, friendly explanation that even if Trump wants to treat this like a transaction, that is wrong. He says, I can even understand how Trump's background in business and politics might enable seeing this as a good, if distasteful, deal. But any assistant U.S. attorney would know that's wrong. That is just one of the warnings from one of the several now resigned prosecutors, 6 in all. And this is all coming out of the SDNY, where Trump has had so much of a focus. The mayor was accused of offering essentially a bribery deal to Trump, that he gets preferential treatment, which he otherwise wouldn't get, to dismiss this case, and then the mayor would help Trump politically on immigration in New York. That is completely out of bounds. And as we've mentioned, although none of this should be very political, many of the people objecting are sympathetic to Republican and Donald Trump policies. That's part of how they may have stayed in the administration even for 3 weeks, although some of them were career level. I just quoted you from one who said he gets that Trump has a business view, but this is wrong, and it's the job of the lawyers who swear these oaths to draw those lines.
This is the main thing in the Trump administration. It's not just weaponization, it's not just cutting deals, but it's the intimidation. Intimidation is key to everything Trump does, because he understands that every day he becomes weaker and weaker. And so he just needs to keep people under his thumb in that mob boss style of his through whatever means he can. That's what the consolidation in the power of the executive branch is all about for him. Intimidation, keeping people afraid. That's what it's all about. And the only way we can push back against that is by using our voices. Even if sometimes I stumble over my words like I just did, then we still need to use our voices and call them out. And that is exactly what we're going to be doing on this show every single day. And if you want to support that, as always, you can hit that subscribe button. You can leave a like on this video. And if you stuck around to the end, you can drop a blue heart in the comments. And until next time, I'll see you soon.